Hey, what's going on, guys and gals? Hey, listen, we're going to go over some issues here with these SD boxes. And I've mentioned before with this, the only difference between an amateur and a pro is a pro knows when to stop and seek advice from somebody that has more knowledge than they do. And that's the case here. And I'm very excited to be communicating with Michael here. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. And I guarantee he's kind of like E.F. Hutton. Okay. When he speaks, you want to learn how to use your boxes, you need to listen. Brother, take it away.
You guys are funny. Yeah, man. My name is Mike Joglu. I have a company in Central North Carolina called 57 Sound that does audio restoration and front of house and some light mastering and DJ work and live music and stuff like that. And I use a lot of these X series mixers, as you're going to figure out in a minute when you start to see all my screens and how everything is kind of run. I have a couple of these different stage boxes. I have an S16, which Dana has covered quite extensively already. I have an SD8 sitting here on my desk that we're going to get into. I have an SD16. Both settings, both units kind of apply the same way. The big question here is what do these things do? How do they function in terms of IO? Specifically, the output side, I think, is what we're going to be talking about more than anything else today, especially because we got a goofy little switch on the side that everybody either hits on accident or forgets they hit or doesn't know that it exists. So we're going to chat about that and get into it real quick. So just to give you an idea of kind of what's going on today, I have an X32 next to me on my desk with an SD8 feeding it. I'm running Dante, so if you're curious about any other routing, don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. Audio just comes in from somewhere else, basically through the cards. You're going to notice that I have output 7 patched into the SD8 just for the sake of simplicity, but who knows? That may not change. That may change as we kind of talk through all this stuff. First thing I thought we should do is just get some audio running. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a backing track from my band's Ableton right now. You'll see it coming out on 17 and 18. So where most people will go, they'll go straight to 17 and 18, and then they will immediately start complaining to everybody because there's no audio. Remember, your inputs and outputs, your physical jacks, ins and outs are not normal to their output and input buses or channels in the mixer. So if I go into input here and I see that my 17 through 24 is getting fed from AES, that's no good. I said 17 and 18, so I'm going to go to card 17 and 18, and you will see I have these guys here. Now I'm going to feed my LR bus with these. So I've got some audio running into channel 18 here. So for signal flow for what's happening in this stream, we have channel 18 coming in via the card, and then it's shooting out the LR bus into my desk mixer, which is basically feeding Zoom. So you don't have to really worry about it beyond that. Just assume that LR is making it to you, to a speaker, to a front of house system, whatever. So now the question is, where do I stand with the IO ports on the SD boxes here? So I'm going to turn my backing track off here just to save you sanity. We're going to be working in the routing tables, as you might have expected, but where Dana had kind of pointed out, everybody goes, oh man, I got this SD8 and everything's great and everything works. Everything was great at rehearsal, blah, 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 or I have something, I have to make a change. So what a lot of people are working on here is, they get somewhere out in the field, they get everything working at home, and they run out and they have to change the amount of outputs they have on their SD8 because you've only got 8 of them, right? And they go through their routing tables and they go immediately to this XLR format here, and they start moving things around, thinking that audio will bounce around wherever it needs to go. And you will notice we still have audio, which means that this table does not affect where my AES routing goes. This is the XLR table here. The sources are exactly what you expect, but the outputs are not what most people think. Remember, there are no normaled inputs and there are no normaled outputs on an X32. Input 1 does not normal to channel 1, just like output 1 does not normal to output jack 1, okay? This is only for the physical XLR outputs on the X32 rack. That's why there's only 8 of them. So if you wanted to reroute something that happened in AES, you need to be looking at the AES table, okay? So let's just take a look at this before I move anything. Remember to read your sources. My sources say 1 through 8 and 9 through 16 on the out table. That's not here. That's here, okay? The first set of outputs that we have on our X32 mixers are from the buses themselves. So this output section here are the buses, not the physical connectors. It's a little confusing because these aren't physical connectors, but they give you asterisks here to say, hey, we don't have physical outputs for these specific buses. So people think, oh, these are XLRs. It's not really the case. I'm using bus 7 and 8 right now. If I was to go and turn these off, my audio would go away. Now I'm only using 7, but for the sake of this argument, it's fine. Once I get my buses configured, I realize L and R go to bus 7 and 8. If I was to route this out into different XLR outputs, say 9 through 16, I could do that. Now that wouldn't work super well in this situation because I don't have anything routed from here. 9 through 16 in this case are mix buses and effects racks that I'm not using. So this means nothing. But 7 and 8 are my buses. If I go into AES 50, this means that my outputs are being fed from buses 1 through 8, which means that 1 through 6 are nothing, and then 7 and 8 are my LR. Remember, before I make any changes, I'm plugged into output 7 on the SD8. If I was to take this guy right here and switch it over to 9 through 16, I lose my output because it's feeding buses 9 through 16 to outputs to the physical jacks 1 through 8 on the SD8 box. Okay. Now let's get into the very mystifying switch on the side of this guy. Anybody that owns an SD box is going to remember that there's a little black switch on the left-hand side by the alternets. It says 1 through 8, then it says 9 through 16, then it says 17 through 24. AES is a digital format through a Cat5 cable, but these boxes don't have IP addresses. The X32 doesn't know or care where it sends signal when it sends it down the port. There's only 2 different options. It's port A and port B, and then it's whatever set of outputs. I'm going to kill that real quick, like you said. Okay. So we've got 3 switches on the side of this guy. We have 1 through 8, we have 9 through 16, and we have 17 through 24. So like I said before, these SD boxes don't have IP addresses. The X mixer that is shooting data out to them doesn't really technically know that they exist from an outpoint standpoint. So we have to put them on the right port, and then we have to configure them on the device side for what signals they're going to take in and push out. On the SD8, we've got this little switch on the side. And what that does is it coincides with whatever outputs you have set on the routing table for AES. So if you look on the output side on the left column, we have AES A all the way down to 48 and then B all the way down. The SD boxes only support outputs 1 through 24. So I'm sorry, Dana, here comes my backing track.
Oh, that's all right, man. When you need to use it, that's fine.
So here we go. Is that loud enough for you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So right now I'm feeding buses 7 and 8 through output 7 and 8, going into AES 1 through 8, and then out physical connector 7 to my speakers, right? If I went over here and switched my switch to 9 through 16, the hypothesis is that the SD box will now be fed outputs 9 through 16 to XLR outputs 1 through 8, much like this. So if I go over here and I flick the switch from 1 to 8 to 9 to 16, I lose my audio, okay? If I go back to 1 to 8, I get my audio back. Back to 9 to 16, I have no audio. I'm going to go to 17 through 24. And you will notice I have my audio back. Why? I don't understand. That doesn't make sense. I'll show you why it makes sense. Because this is default routing for the X32. So you'll see that buses 1 through 8 feed AES 1 through 8, but they also feed 17 through 24. I don't know why. This is just the way it is. If I was to turn this over here, my audio goes away.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Now, when people look at this, and let's just say a typical scenario is they're going to use the first 1 through 8 out of the rack and use the 9 through 16 on the mix buses or the XLR outputs. And this is what they want to configure. That is your default routing right there.
This is it. This is a freshly reset console on firmware 4 point something.
I think it's 4.06 probably.
Yes.
But the point that I want to clarify or get people to understand is when they want to use the outputs 9 through 16 on the SD boxes, then they need to move the switch and not this default routing. Would that be correct?
That's correct. If you're so like
Like I said, mix bus 1 through 8, when the rack is set as internal, it is the master. The first 8 XLR outputs on that rack are going to be mix bus 1 through 8.
Yes, by default, if you have a factory fresh console with standard routing and you have an SD8 plugged in and the switch is set to 1 to 8, the physical XLR outputs on the SD8 will match the physical XLR outputs on the X32 rack. So if you were to, the number one use for us in our X32 rack world is to say like, well, I've already got my 8 outputs. I bought my SD8 box and now I want to have 8 more outputs for whatever you're going to use them for. You're going to want to set up your additional outputs in X32 Edit or whatever you're going to use for the additional outputs. But then instead of going into XLR output and playing around, instead of going into output 1 through 16, whatever you're going to play with, you have to start with the switch because your stuff is already set. Your X32 is already going to send out buses 9 through 16 to AES 9 through 16. We need to configure the SD8 to accept outputs 9 through 16 for its jacks.
Now, and I'm going to assume that the SD16, the SD8, all of this same logic is followed.
That's correct.
Very good. Brother, any last words you want to say? Any last thing that you want to put into this dealing with these boxes?
You want last words? It's the same words that I say to 90% of the people that talk to me about all of these X series mixers. Your inputs and outputs are not normaled to their respective buses and channels.
Absolutely. All right, folks, there you go. You got it straight from the horse's mouth. The man uses them. He knows how to use them. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments.
More of a donkey, but okay.
Well, you can come up there at the X32 Rack Users Group up on Facebook, DanaTucker.com. It doesn't matter. Come up there and throw your questions up, and we'll see if we can get you squared away. All right, take care. God bless, and we are out of here.